next week, so I won't be able to join. Maybe, at another time.
Yes, okay. We love having you. So
Thank
good
you.
morning, Boker Tov. Welcome back. Happy New Year. We are now in the book of Shemot, Exodus, portion Va'era, which means to appear. God appears to Moses. I want to go back a little bit in time to the previous Torah portion just to bring everyone up to speed, being we missed a few weeks. So we know that the Jews were enslaved in Egypt. And most of us are very familiar with the story because Pesach. Good morning, Jane.
Hi, how are you?
Passover. Good morning, welcome. So we know the story how the Jews are enslaved in Egypt. And there's a decree of Paro that, good morning, Diane, good morning, that all baby boys being born are thrown into the Nile River, are killed because his prophets tell him that there's going to be born a boy that will usurp him. So he's scared. But the girls, he allows them to live, but they must be raised with Egyptian customs. They cannot be raised as Israelites, as Jews. And of course, the story of Moses very quickly, because there are guards watching when women are pregnant, he's born prematurely. He's born in the 7th month. So no one appears at the door during the birth to take him away. And when he's born at 7 months, he's not born as a preemie. He's born with full capacity and beauty as if he's a 9-month-old baby. And guess what he's named? Who knows the real name given by his parents to Moses? What's Moses' real name given by his mom and dad? Anybody know?
I did know.
Tuvia, which means good. When he's born, his parents see this glow and this holiness, so they name him Tuvia. They name him Tuvia. And when the 9th month comes and the guards are about to take him away, the famous story, he's put into the basket, remember, waterproof little basket, and Miriam, his eldest sister, who was a prophetess, walks along the waterway to make sure he's safe and sound. And it's an interesting story. Bathsheba, the daughter of Paro, is taking a swim in the Nile River. And she sees from afar a basket, and she knew what her father was doing. She knew that her father was a tyrant. She knew that her father considered himself a god. And as a matter of fact, some of the commentaries say something fascinating about her. That why was she swimming? Because she was really immersing in the mikvah. She was converting to Judaism in a sense. She realized that there is a group of people living in Egypt who are more refined, sophisticated, have a very insular life, belief in God. And she wanted to be one of them. And so she's in the water, swimming around, or if you want to say immersing, and she hears the cries of a baby. And the Torah describes beautifully how she stretches out her arm to retrieve the basket. But they also ask a question, the basket was quite far away. Why did she stretch out her arm? Because she was making an effort to reach out. So God made her arm turn into like silly putty, if you remember the story. And she retrieves Moshe, which teaches us if you make an effort, even though you think you'll never accomplish this, how could I accomplish it? It's beyond my reach. But you stretch out your arm, you try, God will do the rest. And she brings Moshe into her home, quickly the story, and he doesn't want a nurse from the Egyptian nursemaids. So she realizes this must be a Jewish baby. He needs a Jewish nursemaid. Now Miriam is circling the palace where Bathsheba lives, and she sees her and she says, come over here, young girl. She was Jewish. Send me a Jewish nursemaid. So who does she send?
Mother.
The mother, Yocheved. So in essence, Yocheved not only nurses her son, she raises her son with Jewish values and mitzvahs in the palace of the king Paro. This is very important to understand as we move forward to analyzing how Moshe which means from the water I took you out. That's what the word Moshe means. Becomes the one who was sent by God to save his people. Now you might say a very interesting question. Isn't it better that God would have sent a Hamisha boy, a yeshiva bacher, who lived among the people, who was a slave amongst his people, who was one of the guys? Shouldn't have God sent one of those guys to save the Jewish people? Someone who's familiar? Like if you watch all the shows about gladiators, he's one of them. He's one of them, and together they rebel against the slavery, they rebel against the king, and they're saved from Egypt. Instead, God chooses a man who's raised as a prince in the wealth of a palace, second in command to the king. He was known as the Prince of Egypt, and he had a fantastic relationship with Paro, by the way. A fantastic relationship. They got along great. Just so people should know the background here. So shouldn't God have chosen a more Hamisha fellow? Someone from the hood, someone from the steppe, right? One of us. So what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think Moses becomes the leader? And we'll see what kind of a leader he is, not just any leader. Why is Moshe chosen?
He was raised with confidence. He didn't have the slave mentality.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. That's a beautiful insight. He was raised in a certain way, like leadership qualities. Anybody else? So let's build on what Diane said, that exactly God wanted somebody that when he comes to the Jewish people and he says, God sent me to take you out of Egypt, first of all, he has to stand up to Paro, his step-grandfather, right? His step-grandfather. And second of all, God, in a certain way, psychologically of human beings, you see a guy who rises to power, you go, Maishaleh, I changed your diaper, remember? Who are you? I changed your diaper. I know who you are. Or another teacher says, Maisha, yeah, he was in my class. He was the troublemaker. He always threw the pencil across the room. God did not want the familiarity of the Bubby and the Zaidi and the kids saying, we knew him when he was a little boy in our neighborhood. He's no leader. He's one of us. Who is he? The balabas. People say, who made him the boss? God wanted a certain detachment in a sense, but not even in a negative way, so that Moshe becomes the true leader. We see soon Moshe is not anything but detached. Mm-hmm. So I want to just share two quick insights about Moshe, and then we're going to go into this week's Torah portion and tie it all together and share some really beautiful psychological insights this week that I feel are very relevant to our lives. So Moshe is now the Prince of Egypt, okay? And the Jews are enslaved. And he's strolling along and he sees a guard, Egyptian guard, beating a Jew to death. Mm-hmm. And I touched on this previously, but I want to share it again for those of us who are new. And as he's about to really kill this Jewish fellow, this Jewish slave, Moshe kills the guard. Yep. And saves the life of this Jewish person, and he quickly buries the guard under the sand. Here is the first example how we see why God chooses the Prince of Egypt. None of the other slaves would have been able to protect their fellow Jew, their fellow slave. It took a prince, someone who is a man of authority, strength, courage, and confidence to step in. You're not killing my fellow Jew. You are not going to get away with this. Self-defense, I'm going to make sure his life is saved. Here we see the first example of Moshe's powerful leadership. He was supposed to be the next king of Egypt. Did you know that? He jeopardized his whole future, his political aspirations, if he had any, and his inheritance. All he needs is to be found out and be hung. You don't kill an Egyptian guard. to save a slave? What happens the next day? Who remembers? He sees two Jewish fellows, Dasim and Aviram, having an argument and beating each other up. He says, gentlemen, stop it. What are you doing? Why don't you portray love for one another? So one of them looks up at him. And by the way, these two fellows throughout the journey out of Egypt are the troublemakers. You know, the two people that are always kvetching on the tour, on the trip? They're hungry and they're tired. This isn't good, and why did you take us here? We wanted to see the monuments. We didn't want to go to the museums. We wanted a Chinese restaurant. Why did you take us to the Spanish restaurant? The food wasn't good. The waitress wasn't nice. Why did we go to this hotel? The beds were hard. The other hotel. There's always two complainers in the group. Dasim and Aviram, throughout the history of the Exodus, they're the two kvetchers and troublemakers. So they said to Moshe, you're going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian guard? And the Torah, the commentaries, Rashi says, and Moshe was afraid. And the fear builds in him. Listen to this brilliant Kabbalistic insight. And what happens next? Who remembers?
He runs away.
Why?
He runs away.
Because Paro puts a price on his head. Now they find out he killed the guard, and Moshe has to run away from Egypt, and he runs to Midian. The Kabbalah says something very fascinating. When he kills the guard the day before, does it say he was afraid? Why didn't it say he was afraid? That's when he committed the murder. It should have said he was afraid, but he didn't. He wasn't afraid. When these two Jewish fellows pointed out, he feels a fear. And the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism on this passage explains that it is the fear that creates the energy to allow people to find out, and then he has to run away. He didn't have to run away the day before because he wasn't afraid. But when his soul lacks the courage and he becomes afraid, it is an energy that creates the atmosphere that now he has to run. So in a very, very fascinating, and I find this very fascinating, so many times it is our actions, our reactions, says the Kabbalah and Hasidus, which is Jewish mysticism, that causes the after effects of what happens. How we react to what we do and how we do it causes what happens sometimes next. So we love to always say, I got a nine hara. I got the evil eye. She didn't forgive me. But the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe writes to someone who writes, the evil eye is always upon me. The Rebbe says, if you believe in it, it will take hold of you. If you don't believe in it, it will not take hold of you. By the way, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't a little bit believe in it, that, you don't have to, like my Baba would say, "V'apsach nish in the eigen." You don't have to throw yourself in everyone's eyes and cause them to create jealousy or animosity. But also you cannot allow everything, a nine hara. I failed, a nine hara. Yeah, I broke the heel of my shoe because I looked too good. My friends, we cannot live our lives thinking everyone begrudges us and there's an evil eye upon us, God forbid. Mm-hmm. So it is the energy of fear that creates the atmosphere where Paro finds out that now there's a price on Moses' head. Now I want to show one more point of how it is because he is the prince that he's forever standing up to bullies, by the way. Now he's in Midian. For 60 years, he disappears from the face of the earth, in a sense. He runs away and he comes to the wells where people are, notice all the stories with the Jewish leaders are by wells, right? Right? Eliezer finds Rebecca for Yitzchak at a well. Remember the story with the well?
Yeah.
Finds Rachel, his beloved, he falls in love at the well. Everything's at the well. There's reasons for that. We'll talk about it another time. And now Moshe arrives at the wells of Midian. And who's there? The daughters of Jethro.
Mhm.
And they're being bullied. They're not being allowed to get water. And Jethro didn't have sons, so his daughters were the shepherds. Why are they being bullied consistently? Because when Yisro, who was the high priest of Egypt and a high priest of Midian, and was one of the advisors to King Paro, and they said he knew every religion and every idolatry, and he worshipped idolatry, saw what was happening, he reneged on his allegiance to Paro. He could not be now a advisor to such a king, a tyrant who oppressed people. He left him. So his daughters, when they came to the wells, they were always bullied by the male shepherds. They weren't allowed to bring water. They had to wait till everyone left. So Moshe comes up to the wells. He sees a group of beautiful girls being bullied. He was very strong. He shoved everyone aside and he says to the girls, go ahead, take your water. And guys, anybody go near these girls, you're gonna have to answer to me. And people backed off. And they get water and they come home. The father says, what happened today? Usually you come home last. They said, there was this guy who didn't let us be bullied today. He says, bring him home. And he ends up marrying the oldest daughter, Tzipporah.
Mhm.
So now we have a picture of Moshe, who he is. He is a young little boy born to the leaders of the Jewish people, raised in the house of the king, has a fantastic relationship with the king. The king loves him, Paro loves him. He's smart, he's good looking, he's courageous, but when he kills the Egyptian guard, there becomes an estrangement between him and Paro, obviously. Paro doesn't like that. You took the side of a slave against me, and he has to run away. He's estranged from Paro. He ends up in Midian. He marries a Tzipporah. All right, everybody, a clear picture of Moshe?
Yep.
Now you see why he, and we'll see even more, becomes the leader of the Jewish people. Soon we're going to see even more his courage, his fortitude, and his humility. He was the humblest of all men. So we all know the story of the burning bush, right? He's a shepherd. He has no intention of going back to Egypt. There's a price on his head. He's a criminal there. And one little sheep wanders off. Now, there's thousands of sheep. Makes you wonder. He's going after one little sheep, but that's who he was. One little sheep wanders off. I'm going to go find that sheep. He wanders off so far out to the place where in later generations, the Holy Temple gets built. Excuse me. The Torah gets given. The Sinai Desert, the Torah gets given. And he sees a burning bush. Who remembers what's the significance of the burning bush? In California, we have millions of burning bushes. Anybody hear God talking over there? Anybody heard the voice of God? What is the significance of this burning bush? Anybody remember or can share? It's not consumed. You know, you make a campfire, what happens to the wood? The wood burns out, right? You need to add more wood. The burning bush is not burning up. And he hears God's voice and they have a whole dialogue. Take off your shoes. You're going to be the one to take the Jews out of Egypt. But why I'm bringing up the burning bush is I saw such a beautiful insight that this burning bush begins the exodus, the redemption of the Jewish people. It is the first steps that we see God is stepping in to the cries, to the pain, to the agony of his people, of the Jewish people in Egypt. Because now God says to Moshe, you're going to go back to Egypt, you're going to go to the king, and you're going to say, let my people go. And Moshe says, what? I have an older brother, Aaron. And did you notice that I lisp because I had a burn on my tongue? Who sends a guy like me? The younger brother, a convict. I have a speech impediment, I'm disabled. And I have an older brother, Aaron, who's in Egypt, who's much more accomplished than me. God says, take that stick that's on the ground, pick it up. He picks it up. It turns into a serpent. So he drops it and he runs away in fear. Poisonous snake. God says, pick up the snake by the tail. Don't be afraid. I'm quoting from the pasuk. And he picks up the snake by the tail and it turns back into a stick. And in the next few passages, we're going to see a constant stick to snake, snake to stick. And the Kabbalah has a fascinating insight into this. And I want to ask you for a moment, what do you think it signifies? He picks up the stick. You notice that Moshe throughout the stories always has a staff in his hand, right? He hits the rock, and then water comes out, and God says, "Why did you strike the rock?" When he hit, and then by the other plagues, right? He's always with the stick.
Mm-hmm.
That's turning into a snake and back into a stick. So while you're thinking, I just want to go back to the burning bush very quickly because I saw something fascinating. That with the story of the burning bush begins the story of our lives. What's the story of our lives? We always encounter fires, flames, challenges, pain, hurt. But look what happens. The Jewish soul does not allow us to get consumed by that pain. The Jewish soul does not allow us ever to get consumed by that pain. It doesn't allow us. Sorry, I just have to plug in my things. Lemma with the plug. Sorry. Give me 1 second. Something happened with my plug. Yikes. You have to pause for station identification. Something happened with my laptop and my plug is not charging me and I'm on low. Give me 1 second. Maybe it's the outlet I'm using. One moment, ladies. I'm just going to see if it's
Don't worry.
the outlet I'm using.
I'm glad that I'm not the only one.
If I get disconnected, what I'm going to do is run to my other computer and you'll give me 5 minutes. But let's see.
Okay.
Here's my laptop. There's a malfunction with my laptop. I don't know what happened here, but okay. Oh, let me talk till we can, and then I'll run to my other computer. So what happens is that God is telling us, your soul will never allow the flames to consume you. You will always be able to persevere. If you tap into your godly soul, there might be a flame, but it will not consume you. You will always be able to bounce back. Why? Because you have that godly connection and your faith in God. So from the onset, when Moshe is assigned to be the leader who takes the Jews out of Egypt, God is already putting in place the foundation of how to overcome challenges, trials, tribulations, pain in life. There'll be fires. I'm not going to deny it. There'll be pain. There'll be Holocaust. But you, Jewish people, you will survive. The flame will not consume you. It will burn, but it will not consume. You will live on. That's what God is telling Moshe through the burning bush. Because we know nothing in the Torah is a coincidence. Nothing. Let's take a breath for a second and digest. Does anybody want to add anything to that concept?
Is that connection to soul only for Jews?
No, every person, by the way, is created in God's image. If you have faith in God, and belief in God, which is, by the way, one of the 7 Noahide laws for all faith communities, that is really what sustains people. When you hit rock bottom and there's nothing to hold on, you have nothing to, what do you have to hold on to? It's faith in God and belief that there's an infinite power that runs the world and there's a plan that keeps us going. If there's no hope in your life, I don't mean you, there's no hope in a person's life and they don't believe that there is a divine plan and that there is the concept of God watching over you, plotting out your life, seeing you, then really there is no hope. There's nothing left. What is there? You know what they say, the joke is, what's the tragedy of a self-made man or a self-made woman? That you worship your creator, yourself. You worship yourself. There's no one else to worship because you made yourself. You don't believe in God. So belief in God really is the foundation of mankind and the universe. I told my children something that I read years ago, that every day, now we have grown children, but we could still tell our grown children, tell your child when you kiss them in the morning, say, I love you. I thank God for giving you to me. Why? Why do you tell your children that? So from a very young age, they know they were given to you, to the parents by God. God put you here. You weren't just born by accident. Oh, yeah, you were an accident. One mother told me one of her children was an accident. I said, no, there's no such thing as an accident. And don't ever tell your child that. Everybody is put on this earth with a mission and unique purpose. Birth is God's way of telling you, you matter. I care about you. You're needed here. You and I, each and every one of us has a unique mission and purpose on earth. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. This is what the flames of the bush are telling you. There'll be fires, but you have a soul, you have a meaning, and you have a purpose. And God now gives Moses his purpose. I don't care that you stutter, he says. It's even better, in a sense, because leadership is not perfection. A true leader is not perfect. A true leader is one that can be with the people, for the people. And this who Moshe becomes. I want to illustrate, and then I want to go into a very powerful story. Moshe, later on, remember what happens in the desert? We discussed this. He goes up onto the mountain. What happens when he is about to come down with the 10 Commandments? Who remembers? Famous story.
He sees the golden calf.
He sees the worshiping of the golden calf. So what does he do?
Drops the tablets.
He breaks the luchos. He shatters it. And Lech, God says, go down. Go down and see what your people have done. He shatters the luchos. And then he breaks up the golden calf. By the way, people don't know the story, but he actually takes the golden calf and he shatters it. You know, whatever way he uses, a hammer or whatever. And God says to Moses, what does God say to Moses then? Anybody remember? I'm going to wipe out the people.
Right.
You'll remain, and from you I will build another generation. What does Moshe say to him, to God? Take me out of your book. Take me out of your Torah. Take me away with the people. You're going to wipe them out? I want to go with you. Remove me from your book. Who talks to God like that? Moshe has a tremendous amount of chutzpah. He says to God, yeah, you're going to wipe out my people? Take me out of your Torah. Don't mention my name anywhere near there. I don't want to be part of this. If my people go, I go. And he says to God, why are you complaining about the golden calf? The Medrash says. The Medrash tells the story. They did it as a favor to you. You're the CEO of a huge corporation. You needed a little help. You needed a COO. What, you think you can run it by yourself? They built a helper to you. You'll make the wind, the golden calf will make the snow. You'll make the day, the golden calf will make the night. What's so terrible if you have a little help? Moses tells God. God says, what are you, crazy? You're one of them. You also like the idea of idolatry of a golden calf? Don't you realize that a golden calf can't do anything? It's inanimate. It's made out of gold, wood, stone. So Moshe says, okay, so why are you angry? If the golden calf can't do anything, why do you feel it's your competition, Almighty God? Why are you angry at the Jewish people? This is Moshe. Who talks to God like that? If it was me, I'd be shivering in the corner. Yes, save me, Almighty God. He says to God, really? You got all perturbed over a golden calf? Really? You yourself said it's nothing. This is the Medrash tells us the conversation Moshe has with God. He has a lot of courage and chutzpah. You know why? Because he doesn't know any other way. I am for the people. They are my people. There's nothing else in his vision. He doesn't look for power. He doesn't look for money. He doesn't look for wealth. He's looking, how can he save his people? And God looks at him and says, you're right. And that's why he breaks the tablets. Why does he break the luchais? Such a valuable thing. Who goes and breaks a Torah, a luchais? A 10 commandment, you know why? The 10 commandments were symbolic of the marriage contract between God and the Jewish people. God is the groom, the Jewish people are the bride. But if there's no marriage contract, there was no ceremony, there was no justice of the peace, that means if the wife cheats, the husband can't say, look, she committed adultery. Moshe says, you weren't even married to them. Can't complain. Moshe broke the evidence. So on every level you look at Moses, what do you see? You see a man, a true leader of his people. Everything he does is for them. He doesn't care about himself. Now we see the Prince of Egypt becomes the Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rebbe of his people. And that's one more fascinating tidbit before we go to the plagues. The very last passage when Moshe dies, remember Moshe dies, God buries him in an unknown place. God eulogizes Moshe. And he says, Moshe was my greatest person. He was a leader, he was this, he was righteous. And then God said, and he broke the tablets. He broke the luchais. Now let me ask you, you're eulogizing a famous surgeon. And you were talking about his great accomplishment. He saved thousands of lives. And guess what? Yesterday, he killed a woman on the table. He miscut a nerve. That's how you end the eulogy of a great person? You say, he broke the luchais? Really? You couldn't end off on a nicer note? But what the Kabbalah explains here is God is lauding Moshe. He even broke the luchais to protect his people. He even broke the tablets to his own detriment because he wanted to make sure that his people were protected and they would not be annihilated. So God uses the breaking of the tablets as a way to eulogize and show us the greatness of Moshe. So even God recognizes, not even God, God recognizes who Moshe is and tells us who Moshe is. So now you understand why he is the one who takes the Jews out of Egypt, gives them the Torah, and sadly dies in the desert and doesn't go into the land of Israel. You know why? Because his people didn't go into the land of Israel. He couldn't go into the land of Israel. He's a man for the people, with the people. Everything is for his people. So now we're going to go into a very fascinating section of the Torah portion. Let's digest for 10 seconds. Any comments, concerns, questions, debates?
I don't quite understand how the breaking of the commandments was beneficial to the Jewish people.
Okay, good question. So explains the following. God gave the Torah, the 613 mitzvahs, the Torah scroll to us at Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights and engraves with God's help the luchos, the 10 commandments, or God engraved it. And then Moses is coming down to teach the people the Torah and give them the foundation of the Torah, the 10 commandments in the square. By the way, the luchos were square, not round. And the luchos is the ketubah. Under the chuppah, the groom hands the bride the ketubah. The luchos are many of the customs of Jewish marriage between man and wife and man and husband and wife, right terminology, is based on what happened at Sinai, which is the divine marriage. What is the ketubah, the marriage contract in the divine marriage between man and God? Man, woman being the bride, God being the groom, is the luchot, because the 10 commandments is the foundation of the Torah. Now, if a person cheats on their wife or the opposite, the ketubah is the proof that there's a marriage. And that going away from the sacredness of the marriage contract is, God forbid, someone cheats, right? But the marriage contract is proof of the marriage. The luchos were proof that the Jewish people were betrothed to God. So it's kind of like a legal strategy used by the defense, Moshe, to say to God, can't really argue because you didn't really have the contract yet. Where's the contract? It's broken. There's no contract. So there's no evidence of marriage. There's no evidence of impropriety because they weren't married. When they went to the golden calf, it was like they were betraying their spouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is symbolic of the marriage contract. This is why it's so significant that he broke the luchos. It's evidence. We don't want any evidence that there was a marriage yet. They get a second luchot, remember? But interestingly, just another interesting insight is when the golden ark is built and put into the holy temple, remember, into the holies of holies, into the Beit HaMikdash, the ark contained not only the whole luchot, the whole tablets, the broken ones. God said, put the broken ones into, as a reminder of what happened, as a reminder of our devotion, that we were able to repair the relationship. Because God could have said, bury the evidence. I don't want the broken luchos anywhere near me. I don't want to be reminded how my wife betrayed me. God says, put them into the ark. It will show the strength of our relationship, that we rebuilt our relationship. And this is really the divine marriage, or the cosmic marriage, is really a lesson in our lives on how to rebuild, forgive, move on when things go wrong sometimes in our lives. Not that I'm saying that anyone should go back if something happens. That's something that's individual. But I'm saying sometimes lesser hurts happen and we have to rebuild. If God could rebuild, we can rebuild. Does anybody want to add or say or?
Is the breaking of the tablets akin to the breaking of the glass in the marriage ceremony?
I never heard that. It might be interesting that we break a glass for two reasons. One, the typical reason is to remember that the holy temple was not rebuilt. It's still shattered. It's still broken. We don't want to ever feel in our lives that there's a joyous moment and we don't remember that the world is not perfect yet. And the second reason we break a glass is to remind us, you're going to be married. Now you're in the honeymoon period, but then he's going to drop mama's baccarat crystal and you're going to rip his coat when you're ironing it, or vice versa. He's going to forget to pick up the cleaners and you're going to forget to put his keys back in his office, and you're going to have broken glass, you can have altercations. So just like under the chuppah, you break a glass and you scream Mazel Tov, then to look back and say, yeah, we had our differences. He didn't do what I said, she didn't do what I wanted, but you know what? Mazel Tov, we love each other. We can get past the broken glass. So that's kind of like the philosophical reason we break the glass. But it could be also because of the luchais, no problem there. That even when you break a glass, you could get back to where you have to be. Yeah. Yeah, we have beautiful traditions, actually. So you know the joke I always say. They go, no, how's married life? He says, well, I'll tell you. When we were dating, I did the talking and she did the listening. Then we got engaged. She did the talking and I did the listening. Now we're married. We both do the talking and the neighbors do the listening. So now Moshe goes back, and I want to talk about the stick and the serpent, but there's a much more interesting tale, and I don't have time. So I'll talk about the plague, and then if we have time, we'll talk about the serpent with the stick, because it's really the remedy for bullying. It's an insight on bullying, but we'll talk about it afterwards if we have time. So you know there's 10 plagues, right? When you sit at the Seder, like that's the most fun part of the whole Seder. The question that people ask, why did God have to punish the Egyptians with 10 plagues? One plague could have done the job. If God really wanted, the plague of the death of the firstborn, trust me, Pharaoh would have chased us all out. But it's very interesting that the Jews are living in a culture of slavery for 210 years. So you might take a slave out of slavery, but you may not necessarily take slavery out of the person. The slave mentality. Did you ever watch The Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah.
If you haven't watched it, it's fantastic. I know I should be giving you like Hasidic movies, but this is really a good movie. And so this fellow, Morgan Freeman, gets out of prison and they give him a job in a supermarket. And he needs the men's room and he asks, can I go to the men's room? And the guy's like looking at him like, guy, you're 65. You don't need to ask me. But the prisoner mentality is with him, right? You can't get away from it. He's so regulated that he even goes to sleep when the prison told him, even though he's free. So when God sends Moshe to take the Jews out of Egypt, he could have taken them out with one swoop. Miracle, plague, out we go. But the Jewish people themselves looked at themselves in the mirror and saw slaves. They didn't see free people. Their whole way of thinking from generation to generation was, I'm a slave. And they were indoctrinated with the Egyptian mentality. So what God had to do now is deprogram the Jewish people. Not only punish the Egyptians, deprogram. So every one of the plagues based on Kabbalah, and there's a whole chart I could share with you if you're interested. I didn't do it because it's very complex. It's going to take 2 hours. Was there to show every Jew, man, woman, and child, that God rules every aspect of this universe. It started off, for example, with blood, Nile. They worshiped the Nile River, remember? Pharaoh worshiped the Nile. The Nile was a god. Why? Because it brought sustenance to the agriculture, water. That's why God turns the Nile into blood. Show them, you think that's a god? That's no god. And so on and so forth. So every one of the plagues was an attack on one part of nature and the philosophy of nature to show the Jewish people God rules everything. The blood in your veins and the frogs on your front lawn, the lice and the animal kingdom, the hail and the locusts. Every part of the universe is ruled by one God, Almighty God, Hashem. So by the time the 10th plague came into being, the Jewish people now had the courage, the fortitude, the insight to say we are now free because God made us free. And now we can step and follow Moshe out of Egypt. It was a program of deprogramming. Like my husband's first cousin, Freida Hecht, he wrote a book called Cult Busters. I don't know if you remember, in the 70s and 80s, the cults went on college campuses and they dragged kids into these cults, and they had a whole brainwash system. And a lot of them were Jewish children, because Jewish children look for truth. Their souls are searching. So Freida Hecht became the cult buster. He would literally kidnap them from the cults and deprogram. It was a very painful thing, and it was very painful. Costed thousands to get the kids out of the cults, but he saved hundreds of Jewish children from cults, Jewish young adults from cults. Yeah. He wrote a book. He was in our synagogue. He spoke about it. It's an amazing, fascinating lecture. So they had to be deprogrammed, and then they were ready to go out. So now we had the 5 first plagues. And of course, every time Paro says, yeah, let them go, as soon as the plague goes away, he changes his mind. We know the story, right? Mm-hmm. Now comes the 5th plague. The 5th plague, the hail. Dam Tzvardei Kinem Arav Dever, hail. Hail means hail, not Hail Mary, hail that falls. And I want to read you what happens. I want to read from the Torah portion because it's very fascinating. Ready? Mm-hmm. Okay. So hail is falling, and why it's so significant is because all the other plagues till now, Paro's magicians and witches were able to recreate. They were also able to turn water into blood. They were also able to bring a plague of frogs. But when it came to something like hail, which fell from the heavens, that Paro's magicians and witchcraft was never able to duplicate. So now is a new phenomena falling down on top of his nation. Now we're talking about hail, rocks of hail, not like sometimes we see hail falling down in our houses. So look what happens. Paro is in shock. Paro begs Moses to pray to God that the hail cease. And he confesses that he has been wicked and promises to set the Israelites free this time. So listen what Moshe says to him.
Don't take.
Thank you. So remember, he sees the hail, it's destroying his land, it's destroying his produce. He calls for Moses and Aaron, come, help me. I confess, I've been wicked, I have sinned, I'm gonna let your people go. So Moshe says like this to him, when I leave the city, I'll spread my hands to the Lord, the thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail. And you will know that God is the true God. But I have to tell you, he says to Paro, I know that deep down you and your servants do not fear God. And now something very weird happens. And Moshe says to him, out of nowhere, guess what? And the flax and the barley have been broken because the barley and the flax were ripe. So when something is ripe and it's standing up strong, what happens? The hail falls and bangs it down. However, he says, the wheat and the spelt have not been broken. Why? Because they were not ripe. They ripen later. Hence, they are still soft and flexible, so they did not break from the impact of the hail. And Moshe goes out, he davens to Hashem, he lifts up his arms, and the hail ceases to fall. Now, this is a very strange story. I read it in English from the passage. I wanted you to hear it in the original, even though I didn't do the Hebrew. Is that okay?
Yep.
Question, okay. So Paro complains, oh yeah, I'm wicked, I sinned. I'll let you people go, just get this out of here. So Moshe says, okay, I'll go to God. I know though that you do not really repented. You don't really repent. I know you truly are not believing that God is the God. And then he says, guess what? He says to Paro, the spelt and the flax and the barley were ripe and tall, so they were broken by the hail. But the wheat and the spelt were soft because they didn't ripen yet, so they were not broken by the hail. And then he goes and he asks God. So the question, all the commentaries jump in. Why is he telling him about the wheat and the spelt and the barley and the flax? What about the bananas? What about the apples? What about the produce? What about the olive branches? What about the 101 other things growing in Mitzrayim that were destroyed by the hail? Why is Moshe pointing out to Pharaoh, these two items? Why? Why is he highlighting what and why is it necessary? You know, the Torah is very concise. Why does God put in the Torah this 2 sentences about agriculture? It's obvious that the hail destroyed the agriculture. It doesn't have to, and if it's specifying, it should specify all the vegetable trees, all the vegetable bushes, all the fruit plants, the blueberries, the strawberries, the raspberries, the lemons. But herein lies in something very, very fascinating. What Moshe is really telling Paro, and not only telling Paro, telling us for all generations. The remedy, the outlook of how we have to address our lives and things that happen in our lives. Does anybody want to jump in and share what they think this is all about?
Well,
Go ahead, don't be shy.
maybe the agriculture that is not broken by the hail represents children whose minds are not fully formed yet, and they can be helped or saved. I don't know.
Good, no, it's possible.
Well-
Remember, I don't have every answer. Just most of the, no, that's a joke. Most of the answers. No, because
Well, there's positive things. You can emphasize the positive, at least something is saved. And also, those are the things that they could make the matzah out of when they leave. But
okay, good, I like that. That's imaginative thinking. Go ahead. Oh, Diane, you said a good point. Anybody else want to share something? So to explain what's going on, I'm going to share a story from the Talmud. Okay? There's a story in the Talmud, a very sad story, or maybe not so sad, not really sad, no. Remember Rabbi Akiva, the famous sage I always talk about?
Yes.
He married a rich girl, remember? And then he goes away to study Torah at age 40. He doesn't even know an aleph. So Rabbi Akiva had a best friend, Rabbi Gamliel, 2 brilliant Torah scholars. And Rabbi Gamliel is traveling in the Mediterranean Ocean in a boat, in a ship. And Rabbi Akiva is on another ship and he sees from afar, the Talmud tells us, that his best friend's ship is sinking and has sunk. And there's nothing he could do about it. He's miles away. And he comes back to land and he's grieving. The great Rabbi Akiva has sunk in a ship. The pain, he saw it happen. He can't believe it. And he comes to the synagogue and lo and behold, he sees Rabbi Akiva in the synagogue. He goes running over to him. He says, hey, he hugs him. Rabbi Akiva, what happened? I saw your ship sink. He said, it did indeed sink. So what happened? And this is what he tells him. A board from the Gemara, from the Talmud, a board from the ship came my way and I clung to it. Remember the Titanic? When each wave came surging towards me, I bowed my head and I let it pass over me. And that's how I survived. Now let's draw a parallel to what Moses tells Paro, Rabbi Akiva tells Rabbi Gamliel. So what he's telling him, Jane, you want to say?
Well, you
Go
can
ahead.
you can still survive if you change your ways and guide your people in the right way.
Brilliant, exactly. That as a person, as a leader, as a mother, as a father, as a teacher, you sometimes You cannot hold on to something that you see is going the wrong way because your ego gets in the way. We'll do it my way or no way. When you see you're going to sink, you don't say to the wave, I'm stronger than you. You bow your head because you know when the wave passes over you, you can bow back up. But when you're ripe and the hail and you're standing strong, the hail is going to knock you down. But the plants that were soft and pliable, they survived the hail because they bend with the wind. The wind blew, but they bent with the wind. They shook and they swayed with the wind. But the plants that were tall and strong got smashed down because they refused. They were, or it's a metaphor. They did not bend with the wind. Rabbi Akiva said, yeah, I held onto a board, but when the waves came, I bent my head. I let the waves come over me. And that's, the difference between General MacArthur and Napoleon. General MacArthur was in a battle and he told his troops, retreat, turn. So his sergeant in command said, General, are we retreating? He says, no, we're changing direction. A general knows when you need to change direction. You don't keep going that way because I'm the general. This is the way, and your people will perish in the war. You need to retreat, you retreat, but you change direction. He called it. And Napoleon, when he saw that the Russians were winning the war because of the cold weather, remember the story with the Russians? Napoleon was defeated because of the Russian winters. He was a Frenchie. He didn't have the material to fight in a Russian winter. No food, no, the necessary. What happens? His men, his advisors, his military advisors show him a map. They go, General Napoleon, we cannot win the war. Look at the map. You know what he says? We will not retreat. You just have to make me a bigger map. His ego did not allow him to take a different direction when he had to, and his people perished in the war. So basically, Moshe is saying to Paro, I know you don't fear God. You're like that plant. The hail hits you. You do not know how to retreat, sway, change direction when you're wrong. The ego sometimes comes in our ways and doesn't allow us to do what we know is right and allow us to change direction. That's insanity. That famous saying about insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So these two passages are put into the Torah to show us that you might be going a certain way. You might be holding strong, thinking you are taking the high ground. But it really is the ego and the misdirection that's making you stand strong. It is your humility and your open-mindedness and actually faith in God, because you realize that not everything you know best allows you to change direction. And sometimes it's with our children, with our spouses, with ourselves, with our colleagues, with our workers, with our attitudes, everything. There's a story. A man was coming, a Jewish man was coming the holiday of Sukkot in the olden days, not now. And what is the beauty of Sukkot? You buy that beautiful etrog. The more you spend, the nicer you get. You know what I mean by the etrog, the lemon, right? They're very expensive. He had no money to buy a beautiful etrog that year. Business in the shtetl wasn't so good. And he can't drop it. Beautiful, expensive pair of tefillin, phylacteries, He says to himself, my phylacteries, I'm not going to need on Sukkot, because 7 days of Sukkot, you don't wrap tefillin. So let me sell them. I'll buy the etrog, and I'll have a beautiful etrog for 7 days. This is how he's thinking. So he goes to the pawn shop, he sells his tefillin, and he buys them. He has so much money now because his tefillin are vintage artifacts. He gets the most gorgeous esrog, unseen in the shtetl. And he brings it home. And it's right before Sukkot, and he says, Gittel, Gittel. You won't believe it. I managed to get us an esrog for Sukkot. She says, what? How did you do it? We had no money. He says, oh, no, don't worry. I sold my tefillin. She said, but honey, after Sukkot, which is only 7 days, you're going to need tefillin for the rest of the year. How could you trade a 7-day etrog for a full year of tefillin? He says, don't worry. We'll work it out. She says, I'm so proud of you, honey. So she says, go bring it to me. Let me see it. He says, okay. He goes to the kitchen. He can't find it. He can't find it. What happened to my esrog? He says, honey, did you see my esrog? It was like this big. That was an esrog? That was an esrog? I was making a fresh salad and I needed a squeeze of lemon and I saw a lemon on the counter, a big lemon, but a lemon. And I had no idea. And I started to kvetch it and nothing came out. So I cut it up and I put it into the salad. And he looks at his wife and he gives her the biggest hug and kiss. And she says, Moshe, bist normal? You're not going to rave and rant and yell? Because I did what I did? I can't believe what I did. He says, Gittel, let me tell you. I needed to do the mitzvah of tefillin, so I wrapped my tefillin. Then I needed to do the mitzvah of etrog, so I went, sold my tefillin, and bought an esrog. Now that my esrog was taken away, now I see I have only one mitzvah left to do, love my wife. And that's what I'm going to do, love my wife. Now, only a person with true fortitude and intentions can change their path. I would have screamed, yelled, raved, broken 20 glasses in the house. I wouldn't be talking to my husband for 10 years after that story.
Oh.
This teaches us that when you are truly entrenched in belief in God and you have your priorities and values straight, you can always change your path. You can always change directions because you know what really matters. Paro, he didn't care about anybody. He didn't care the truth.
Don't type.
Thank you.
He cared only about himself. I'm a God. It's me, me, me. I don't care what happens to my people. Moses was a leader. Moses says to him, when you need to change direction, you change direction. That's how you survive. Not by holding on to principles that are not real principles. That sometimes, think about sometimes our biggest arguments is all about the ego. It's not really about doing the right thing. If it is, then you're doing the right thing. If you're fighting for values, morality, ethics, truth, Torah, God, that's one thing. But if it's because your ego doesn't let you change direction, you have to reevaluate where you're heading, where you're going. This is why the Torah interjects 2 passages. Seemingly, tell me, if you and I read this in Shul, would we even think about it? We wouldn't even think, oh yeah, why is this here? It's not that outlandish, it's describing what happened. That's why Hasidus, mysticism, and Kabbalah takes every passage and analyzes and brings to us the lessons of Torah which are eternal. And lessons, I think, that give us new perspectives every day and help us look at ourselves in a new way, in a better way every day and work on ourselves. How can I be better? How could I do better? How can I look at things differently for myself, my family, my children, my neighbors, my community, my life? And really, how can I be a leader in my own personal life? A leader doesn't only mean you're leading others, you also have to lead yourself. Can you be a Moshe and stand up? And sometimes it takes a chutzpah to do and say what you have to say and have to do with yourself, with your children, your spouse. hopefully in a very good way.
Mm.
So you know the story of a guy. He has an argument. It's an ongoing argument with his wife. He wants to buy a boat. She doesn't want a boat. It's expensive. It takes up time. It takes space. What do we need a boat? Better, I need something. I need a new this. I need a new that. Finally, he comes up with a plan. Honey, if I buy the boat, you can name it. She says, okay, good. I like it. He buys the boat. They go to the shipyard. He says, "No, you ready? You have the sign, you have the name?" She says, "Absolutely." She brings out the plaque. It says, "For sale." It's all about compromise. Okay. So does anybody have any questions, concerns, debates? So we'll end off on a high note, especially during these very trying times, that first of all, Shemar Shabbos, light Shabbos candles 18 minutes before sunset. We need as much light in this very dark world, as much spiritual light, and a little tzedakah, a penny or two before you light your Shabbos candles. And for those of you who are going to see me in shul, fully masked, I'll see you in shul Shabbos morning. It's so funny how people come to shul and I say, I haven't seen in years. And I said, welcome. They go, yeah, we feel we need it during these trying times. We feel we need it. We feel we need to be in shul. So of course, social distancing, and everyone should be well, and may your flames burn bright. And remember, you will never be consumed. The neshama always keeps us in the right way, the right direction. So good Shabbos. If anybody wants to add anything.
No, good Shabbos, Freida. Thank you.